Okay. See you. Guys, coming to you live from here in northern Israel. Where one of my sources on the ground just confirmed uh, intel from inside Gaza. Multiple eyewitnesses, multiple eyes on the scene, multiple confidential recordings. And you might ask why the recording's confidential. The recording's confidential because we don't want to give up sources, right? That could put people's lives at risk. And what I'm about to tell you is not a surprise. And I've been telling you this now for the past number of videos, exposing the fabrication of these so-called protests against Hamas in Gaza. Which it would be, let me just be the first to say, it would be nice if what I'm about to tell you is completely wrong and completely false. I would love it if I was completely wrong about all this. But so far the evidence, really the proof, is to the contrary. And so if what I'm telling you is in fact countered by anything, it will be countered by new efforts that will invalidate the efforts I'm telling you about, which are significant. So what's happening is, if you're not aware, just to get you guys up to speed in case you haven't seen the last few videos, which I suppose is probably the case for most people, or pretty much anyone. In Gaza, there have been now for 2 days straight, and this is the third day, but starting 2 days ago, people in Gaza have been protesting against Hamas, saying, get out Hamas, we don't want Hamas anymore. Hamas has brought us nothing but war and destruction. We want peace. We want the end of the war. We want to eat. We're hungry. How can we be resilient if all we get is more death and destruction? Hamas isn't helping us. They're just blaming Hamas for everything. And they basically want to see the end of Hamas rule in Gaza. And they want to see the end of the war. Now, on the one hand, of course, as somebody currently living in Israel, I could tell you that's great. That's wonderful. We want that too. We want an end to the war. We want Hamas to be out of power. On the other hand, I can tell you it's completely fabricated. It is a Hamas-led psyop to force the locals in Gaza to do these protests and to so-called demand the removal of Hamas. Now, why would this be a psyop, you would ask? Why would Hamas want to organize protests against Hamas? It's very easy. And I mean, I've just literally seen video of them doing it. Right? They're organizing videos against themselves for the purpose of distracting attention from actual pressure coming down to bear on them finally. Right? It's very convenient for Hamas that the protests against Hamas now are happening now as they're finally feeling real pressure from the Israeli troops and the Israeli armed forces. Now that Israel is not, operating with one arm tied behind its back, right? We don't have President Biden in the White House anymore telling Israel, don't do this, don't do that when it comes to military operations. We have President Trump in the White House. Now, love him or hate him, he's a very transactional president. And at the moment, he is very supportive of what Israel is doing. I say at the moment because, listen, he's very transactional. And, maybe he supports Israel strongly, hugely, more than any other president ever before, some will say. I will say, well, that's about as reliable as a wet paper bag. Because, he could change his moment mid-sentence. He could change his opinion mid-sentence. And he could say, I love Israel, I'm the strongest supporter of Israel, and we're going to stop supporting them right now. And that would be a normal Trump sentence. That's how the guy is. He's extremely temperamental. Extremely. It doesn't matter if you love the guy or not. It doesn't matter if you hate the guy or not. He is extremely temperamental. If you don't recognize that about the guy, then I don't know what to tell you. You're blind, or you're deaf, or both, or you're illiterate. Right? He is extremely temperamental. That's something he even brags about in a way, by saying he likes to be different. He likes to be the sort of unknown quantity in the equation. He can do crazy things, and that keeps his opponents off guard. They don't know how to handle him. Okay, so that means he's very temperamental. He's very volatile. Whether you like him or not, I don't care. But recognize that as one of his qualities. It is one of his character traits. Which means Israel has to make maximum use of this very small window, potentially small window of opportunity. It could be that he's going to be super friendly to Israel for many years, as long as Bibi stays on his good side and stays in power, right? Or whoever is the prime minister of Israel, as long as that person stays on Trump's good side. Maybe he'll keep being supportive of Israel. For now, he is. And that means Israel has no hands tied behind its back. And Israel is bringing more of the weight that it can to bear upon the Hamas. And whether Hamas likes it or not, they're feeling the pain. And they don't like it, obviously. And we knew that would be the case all along, which is why many Israelis were willing to put up with the hand behind the back operational methods during the last year and a half. And now that the new sheriff is in town, it's the cops are going to have a much easier time dealing with the bad guys, so to speak. And yes, even though President Trump is not the president of Israel, listen, the president of the United States, the White House, and the American government in general have a massive amount of influence in Israel. Whether I don't care if you're one of these crazy conspiracists that think, the Jews in Israel control America. Well, it's really the opposite way around in many ways. America has a massive amount of influence in Israel, a massive amount. Okay, at the end of the day, what Israel does is what Israel does. But if you think that we're not affected here by what the American president says and does, and by what the American government says and does, you're very wrong. We are very much affected by that. We are very strong allies with the Americans here in Israel. I am American and Israeli, so I'm a strong ally with myself. Americans and Israelis are very strong allies. The best of friends. But Israel, does feel the impact of that alliance many times in both positive ways and sometimes not positive ways, because American influence here is outsized, but that's okay. As long as America is the good guys, then great. So no problem. And for, since Israel's creation, America has been the good guys. And even I would argue America has been the good guys for far longer than that. But at least since Israel's reestablishment as a country in 1948, America has been the good guys, and America has been supportive of Israel to some degree since then, and increasingly since then. But if you really think about it, yes, America was a key supporter of Israel when it was reestablished in 1948. But actually, America's first military alliance was France. Its key military alliance was actually with the French. The French government actually was the first Western power that actually supported and helped Israel. A long history there. We'll go into that some other time. But the point is, of this video, what we're seeing right now in Hamas and in Gaza is, with the protests against Hamas, is a complete psyop. I've literally just seen video proof of that from witnesses on the ground, unnamed sources and stuff, who, showed me videos of them just yesterday and 2 days ago recording. And you can ask yourself, well, how did they get in and out? Well, Israel has a lot of forces on the ground in Gaza right now, as you can imagine. And there's people coming in and out all the time and shuffling to and fro. It's not a very big country. People have days off. People have other missions to go on. People have to do whatever they do. And no, I'm not serving in any military role at the moment. So I've long since been out of the military. Many, many years. effectively, yeah. And so what I've just seen is literally video evidence. It doesn't matter. You know what? It doesn't even matter if I saw it or not. Okay, I can tell you, if you look at the timing, the convenience for the Hamas for having these anti-Hamas protests now. Boy, isn't that convenient that now, when all eyes are focused on Israel destroying Hamas, all of a sudden there are anti-Hamas protests. All of a sudden, oh, what a miracle. What a coincidence. Now that the ceasefire is over and nothing is stopping Israel from completely eliminating Hamas. Now all of a sudden there are people pretending that they want to get rid of them too. People locally in that area. Right? When we know this entire time they've not once actually had such a protest of this size since October 7th. Not once. And remember, there was one protest of note before. There were two actually, but one of note, where the locals in Gaza protested against Hamas. And the Gazans remember exactly what happened to those people. They were brutalized, they were tortured, they were beaten, they were disappeared, they were raped, they were killed, you name it. Bad things happened to those that participated in those protests against Hamas. Really terrifyingly bad things. And unlike Israelis, the Gazan population does not have the Israeli army to protect them as well as they can when they don't screw up like they did on October 7th and let hundreds of Israelis get kidnapped and more than 1,200 get murdered by Gaza people, including Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a whole number of other terrorist organizations, and, this is important, more than 3,000 regular civilians from Gaza who participated directly, who ran through the fences and participated directly in attacks themselves with their bare hands, with guns, with grenades, with knives, you name it. They participated directly. They were part of the terrorist forces. And why? Because they were promised by the terrorist forces. Let's just say they have right to armed resistance. There's no resistance that allows you to target civilians. There is no legitimate resistance that allows you to target civilians. That is completely wrong. You're lying. What's your name? Anyway, whatever your name is, it's absolutely illegal to target civilians and non-combatants in what you call armed resistance. Armed resistance is only allowed against combatants. There are strict rules to that. They do not have the right to ignore the laws of war, but they do ignore the laws of war because they're not a state. Therefore, they don't sign the Geneva Conventions. They don't have a regular army to sign it with. They don't observe the Geneva Conventions. They don't even honor the Geneva Conventions. If they're supposed to, if they have a right, as you call it, to armed resistance, then they also have an obligation to allow hostages to be visited by the UN and by ambassadors of their own country and by ambassadors of allied countries. They've done none of that. They've broken every law. They are to be eliminated, is what they are to be. That's the right they have. They have the right to be eliminated without due process because they don't observe due process. And by the way, the Israeli army continues to do due process even against an enemy that has no right to it. Right? There are literally teams of lawyers for every Israeli military attack that happens when they target a high-value target. How many teams of lawyers do you think the Hamas employs to attack Israeli civilians? The answer is 0. Hi. I see people. Yeah. The Hamas does not have any right to armed resistance against civilians. And by the way, what they're doing is not armed resistance. Okay, you might believe that, but it's not. What they're doing is genocide. They're attempting genocide against the Jewish people. If you don't understand that, read their charter. It's in their charter. Believe what they say and what they do. Don't believe the nonsense and the lies you read and the propaganda you read by idiots and useful idiots on the left or the extremes who tell you whatever garbage because they think it's cool to stand with the Palestinian people. It's completely moronic. Okay? If you're one of those useful idiots, you're just helping them to get to you faster. What do you think will happen if you live in the West? What do you think will happen if Israel falls? They will come for you next. It doesn't matter what religion you are. You could even be a Muslim. They will come for you next. If you don't believe in their perverted version of it, they will come for you next. They absolutely 100% come for you next. And if you do believe in their perverted version of it, well, you better be a man, because if not, you're in for a hell of a ride. If you're a woman or anything that doesn't identify as a man, you're in for a hell of a bad ride. Right? They have every desire to abuse, dehumanize, oppress, torture, and even end the lives of people who don't believe in the way that they believe and who don't happen to be men. Don't take my word for it. Look at their society. Look what they do to people who aren't men in their society. Right? If you're a woman, they make you wear a covering from head to toe, pretty much. Increasingly, they've been doing that, even in Gaza. Right? It didn't used to be like that in Gaza. Women in Gaza did not have to wear that crap when Israel was in charge. But now, increasingly, they do. Why? For fear of attacks from Hamas. Because they know that Hamas can get away with abusing them, punishing them, even imprisoning them for not wearing that stuff without any reason. It's not even a law in Gaza that you have to wear it, but they make it so. They enforce it, even without it being a law. So again, why would Hamas be running psyops against Hamas right now to make people people in Gaza protest against Hamas? Because it's to their advantage. To make idiots, frankly, like you, who said that they have the right to armed resistance, they make idiots like you think, oh, look, the Hamas are reasonable, and the Gazans are reasonable, and they want peace. No, they're not reasonable, and they don't want peace. If you believe that, you're really a useful idiot, because if they wanted peace, then why did thousands of Palestinians participate in October 7th? Regular Palestinians, not so-called terrorists. Thousands and thousands of regular Palestinians participated in October 7th, murdering Israelis, murdering non-Israelis, by the way, tourists, foreign workers, murdered them outright, cold blood, for no reason. They just happened to be in Israel. Kidnapping Israelis and non. They kidnap lots of non-Israelis. Look at all the Thai workers they kidnapped for no reason. And you're going to tell me with a straight face that they have a right to such actions? You're going to tell me with a straight face that they're not capable of running psyops to protect their own interests? They 100% do. They are 100% doing that. And if you don't believe that, well, you need to open your own mind, because if you think the Hamas can be trusted after what they did on October 7th, you're much a fool. You are a sucker. There's no other word for it. You are a sucker. All right? They absolutely have played you. They are making you look like the idiot that you are, because you believe that they don't actually want to end the lives of everyone in Israel, even though they've said repeatedly that they do actually want to do that. It's in their charter. It's written in their charter. And they've said repeatedly they are going to repeat October 7th again and again and again and again, as often as they can. They're not going to stop. They're going to take every opportunity to repeat October 7th. That's what they're going to do. If you don't understand that, I don't know what to tell you. You need to understand that. You desperately need to understand that. Okay? You desperately need to understand that the people of Hamas and it really takes a special kind of dupe to fall for the kind of lies Hamas is peddling right now. Okay? When they say they have streets protesting against them, if you don't understand that their way of showing to the idiots of the world, oh, look how humanitarian they are. Look how democratic they are. Look how much they care about their people that they let them protest. I thought Israel said they always kill their protesters, but here they are protesting. How can that be? That could be because it's a psyop. That can be because these protests have not gotten to the point that Hamas can't control them. Right? Once Hamas says stop, they will stop. If they say stop and the protesters don't stop, then you will see loss of dead protesters. And that will probably be when you know that the protests have gotten to the point where they are no longer in control by Hamas. And that is not likely to happen. Yes, there are likely to be some people who convince themselves that the protests are real. I mean, the dupes in the crowd that are being controlled by the population. Most of the Palestinians are aware these are psyops. I've seen evidence of it. I have to tell you, it's a well-organized psyop. On day one of this, I told you there's a high chance it could be a psyop. Yesterday, I told you that's very clearly a psyop. Now I can tell you definitively it is a psyop. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you believe me or not, by the way. And you can tell me I'm wrong. Bring me evidence that I'm wrong. Show me that the Palestinians are somehow not running a psyop right now. I'd love to see it. Right now, all the indications are that's any argument to the contrary is just nonsense. They're 100% running psychological operations to confuse people in the West, mostly. To confuse you, to make you believe that they are somehow innocent people in Gaza who just want peace. They're not innocent, and they don't want peace. If they wanted peace, again, please answer the question. Why have they not protested like this until now? Why did they wait until Israel's hands were no longer tied behind his back? How convenient is that, right? Oh, and all of a sudden when they're being slaughtered, right? Because until now, you got to remember, Israel did not use the full weight of its force against Gaza. Not even, literally not even close. Israel has been extremely surgical and precise in its attacks against Hamas. Extremely. You don't have to believe me. Look at what they've done and look at the forces that we know they have. Publicly available data. Yeah? Even magazines like Jane's Defense will show you, right? Like the well-read public magazines will show you the kind of forces that they have at their disposal. And the fact is, Israel has not been operating with its full force, not even close. Okay. Kinetically, Gaza could be a former thing if Israel wanted it to be. Like in less than a day. Okay. It could not just bomb it out of existence, it could bomb it to the point where it's literally a hole in the ground and the seawater fills it up in less than a day. That's what could happen in less than a day. Okay. And Israel has not done that for one reason and one reason only. Israel does not want to kill millions of people for no reason. Okay? But now Israel does not have its hands tied behind its back, so it is free to get rid of the Hamas. And get rid of the Hamas, it is exactly what it's going to do. Does that mean they're going to get every single last person in the Hamas? No, it doesn't mean that. It means they're going to remove them from power. They're going to make space to replace them. Who's going to replace them? Time will tell. Maybe the Israeli government knows already who it wants to replace them. Maybe it doesn't. If you ask me, I believe they don't actually know. They may have some ideas, but they don't actually know 100%, which is why the Israeli government has announced has leaked, really. And the Financial Times reported that Israel is going to reoccupy Gaza militarily with no end in sight. And why? Because the Arabs have not, I mean, like the Qataris, the Emirates, even the Palestinians, right, who you would think would care the most about this issue, have not suggested anything in terms of who might replace the Hamas. Nobody. Right? Now you could say, well, who is it? Why should anybody except the Palestinians be? Why shouldn't they have self-determination? They should have self-determination. One of the things about self-determination is you have the full rights and responsibilities of self-determination. If you're not responsible, you lose those rights. They go hand in hand. You can't be both irresponsible and a holder of the rights. That's not how that works. You need to be a responsible holder of the rights. If you're not a responsible holder of the rights, guess what? You lose your rights. Right? And if somebody comes along and takes those things away from you because you were not a responsible holder of the rights, that's how the cookie crumbles, man. Not fun. And one of the easiest ways to lose those rights is to be not just irresponsible by doing stupid, spending a lot of money on your wealthy, giving a lot of tax breaks to your wealthy people and not giving the greatest health care to your average citizens. No, that would be bad policy. It would be well within their rights to do it. It would be stupid, but it would be well within their rights. That would be not necessarily the most responsible they could do, but they have every right to make stupid decisions like that. No. An example I'm talking about is you use the foreign assistance money that you get from friends around the world who support your so-called cause, which is, again, I remind you, the genocide and elimination of all Jews in the world and all Israelis and the destruction of Israel. Israel is the only country in the world that is constantly under threat of being destroyed by enemies. The only country in the world. There are plenty of countries at war, but those countries are not constantly in threat of having their entire population exterminated for the crime of being who they are, the crime of having their religion, for the crime of being a people of a certain ethnicity, for the crime of living in a certain piece of land, having their entire nation completely destroyed and having all their citizens killed. It's the only country in the world. Find me another country constantly under that threat. There is not one. And it's the only country in the world where the enemies who are doing this to this country that's being threatened get billions of dollars a year in international support to fund their disgusting ideological bloodlust. Somehow people think it's okay to give money to the Palestinians while they are literally chanting and dreaming for the death and destruction of Israel. It's insane. Okay, so at some point, the pity machine breaks. The sympathy well runs dry. And the arm of the law, in this case, the Israeli army, is coming to get justice for the Israeli citizens and is coming to get the hostages out of Gaza one way or the other, and is coming to end the Hamas's rule over Gaza. And if you like Gazan civilians, and if you like them to live, you should be behind Israel ending the Hamas, because the longer the Hamas is in power, the more civilians in Gaza will die. Because that's how war goes. Yes, combatants are the primary targets, but there are always civilian casualties in a war, especially in urban warfare. If you don't understand that, go learn a thing. When the Americans fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, do you think there weren't any civilian casualties? Do you think the civilian casualty rate in those conflicts was anywhere near as low as it is in Gaza? When people say, the genocide in Gaza, do you realize that there's less than 2 Gazan civilians killed for every terrorist killed? Which it may sound you crazy. Like, why are they killing more civilians than terrorists? Because the terrorists are hiding behind civilians. Literally, the terrorists are hiding behind civilians. And the fact that Israel is able to kill less than 2 civilians for every terrorist it kills is a ratio so staggeringly unbelievable, it's not even close. Like the lowest number we've ever seen in urban warfare before Israel did this, the lowest number by foreign powers, because Israel has always had staggeringly low numbers, but this is a new record, okay? But in terms of non-Israeli countries, the lowest numbers we've ever seen in non-Israeli combat are American forces and allies of America's forces in places like Fallujah in Iraq. You know what the ratio there was? And it was considered at the time exceptionally low. It was considered a new record. It was considered a phenomenal and outstanding achievement. People were given medals for how low this ratio was. You ready? Because remember, in Israel, it's less than 2 civilians per terrorist, right? It's shockingly low. You know what it is in Iraq under the American forces? 9 civilians to every terrorist. That was their record low. For every terrorist, they killed 9 civilians. In Gaza, for every terrorist, they killed less than 2 civilians. Right? Do you understand that? In Iraq, America killed 4.5 times as many civilians per terrorist than the Israelis are killing civilians per terrorist in Gaza. Do you understand that? Do you understand how much better Israel is at this than the Americans were? Do you understand with how much more care the Israelis have operated? How much more risk they put on Israeli lives? Remember, there are far fewer Israeli soldiers than there are American soldiers. I'm not discounting or dismissing the value of an American soldier. Every life is a life. Every life is priceless in many ways. Every life is equal. Okay? Including Palestinian lives are equal. If they would stop being bad actors, that would be great. But they are equal in terms of value as a human life. Okay? However, when they're doing bad things, well, yeah, they might have to die because that's part of military action against them to make them stop doing bad things. Like what? Like committing acts of terrorism, attacking unarmed civilians. It doesn't even matter if the civilians are armed. They're attacking civilians. They're attacking non-combatants. It is illegal. And they do it anyway. They don't have the right to that in their so-called armed resistance. You don't have the right to attack civilians. So, anyway, once again, the protests against Hamas in Gaza right now are a Hamas-led, Hamas-directed psychological operation, or a psyop, to make people in the West be distracted and demand that Israel stop bombing Gaza. That's what's going to happen. You're going to see the U.S. asks, and the Europeans are going to ask Israel to not bomb Gaza so hard because of all the innocent civilians who clearly don't want Hamas to be in power and are looking for a solution. And we're putting together a group of so-called experts from around the world to have a discussion or 10 or have some summit in some fancy hotel in some ridiculous country to discuss this latest development. It's a nothing burger. Hamas is conducting and orchestrating protests against itself for precisely the purpose of distracting the West. That's it. Hamas is scared to death of death. They pretend that they're not, but they are. They don't want to die, even though they say they do. They always brag about, we want to be jihadi shaheeds and we want to die for the cause of Allah. There's no greater reward than dying for Allah, and you go to heaven and you get your 72 Virginians. We know they're lying. We know they're cowards. We know they're chickens. And we know that they are literally scared of dying. And by the way, it's perfectly natural to be scared of dying. People should not want to die. But these people have a cult of death, a death cult. And most of them are pretty hardened to it and believe it. But a lot of them don't, especially their leaders. Their leaders are the ones who believe it the least. Okay? Their leaders are the ones who send the young men mostly to fight and die. And the leaders don't want their own children dying. The leaders don't want themselves dying, and they know they're on the list. And there is a list. And they're absolutely on it, and they're absolutely going to get eliminated, especially if they don't surrender, or at least leave and say, okay, I give up the game. We're done. We're going to release the hostages, and we're just going to go. We're going to leave. And where can they go? Well, they can go to Egypt. The leaders can pay the $10,000 per person to go to Egypt for themselves and their crew. They can do that. They got billions of dollars. They have no problem paying $10,000 for the entry to get to Egypt. No problem. They can go. Right? The average Gazan may not be able to pay for that, but the leaders of Hamas certainly can. They have many billions of dollars. They can easily pay for all of their leaders. And by the way, Israel would not stop them leaving. And Egypt, as much as it doesn't want Palestinians on its territory, would not mind letting the leaders of Hamas leave through its gate and then fly them to some other country, preferably, because Egypt doesn't want them there, even though they have a ton of terrorists there in Egypt. So that's what's happening. But that's, the leaders of Hamas are frankly too stupid. They're really too stupid to surrender and leave. They're just too dumb. They're inviting death. Death is a coming. They're not gonna get away with this. They're either gonna flee and live in exile, or they're going to die in Gaza, because that's what's happening now. And they're trying to stop it by having these so-called protests to remove them from power. They're hoping that they can use that as an escape valve somehow. Maybe force themselves to be outed from power temporarily, or not at all. But really, they don't want to be outed from power, and they're not going to be outed from power, except by force coming at them from the Israelis. There's nothing else that's going to get them out of power. Not the Palestinian Authority, not the international community, not American pressure, not European pressure, not UN pressure. Nothing is going to get the Hamas out of power except Israeli power. That's it. That's it. You might not like it. I'm perfectly happy with Israel getting rid of Hamas, because that's what should have happened many, many years ago. But that's the reality. There's nothing else that's going to get these guys out of power. And there's nothing else that's going to get Israeli hostages back home. Literally. You can say, well, they might negotiate another ceasefire, another truce. That's Israeli power too. And it's Israeli weakness when Israel is willing to give up literally thousands of terrorists for a tiny number of hostages. But that's because Israel values human life, and I'm glad that Israel does that. Because as terrible a deal as it might seem on paper, getting back a hostage from that hell is worth releasing 100 rats, and yes, I just called them rats, out of prison to go back to their rat-infested holes. And I'm sorry I offended rats like that. But it's worth releasing 100 scumbags to get back a hostage. I'll tell you why. Israel's forces will get those 100 scumbags again. We've already began, by the way, arresting some of those scumbags. Why? Because they jumped right back into the terrorism game. They couldn't wait. They couldn't calm themselves down for even a day. They literally went right back into it, and a number of them have already been arrested again. Now the question is, have they been arrested with or without evidence? Blah blah blah. Listen, Israel knows what it's doing. It does not randomly arrest people. Okay. Why? Because they don't need to gum up the courts with false arrests and false charges. They got plenty of reasons to arrest plenty of people. So they go after the ones that they have reasons to arrest. They don't randomly go after people for no reason, right? Now you can say, well, there are times when when they're doing bad things, when the cops in Israel are doing bad things, or when the army in Israel is doing bad things to Palestinians in Judea, Samaria, or wherever. Yeah, it's very possible, and I'm sure it is. I know it has happened, and there have been court cases about it, and there have been reprimands, and there have been punishments, and there have been jail sentences for Israelis who did bad things to people living in Judea and Samaria, right? Absolutely, and just Israelis who happen to be Arab, or Palestinians who happen to live inside Israel, etc. There've been plenty of, no shortage of cases of Israelis abusing their power, but we have a system, a criminal court system in Israel, and a justice system in Israel that's supposed to dispense justice. And yes, there have been abuses of justice. There have been bad trials. There have been, clearly sentences that were not harsh enough, and some sentences on other guys that were too harsh. Yeah, that's normal in any country. You're going to have flaws in any system, so in any criminal justice system. No criminal justice system is perfect. Name me one around the world that's perfect, please. There isn't one. So why should Israel be held to a standard that doesn't exist? Oh, Israel has to have a perfect system, but no other country does? Please, your hypocrisy is screaming. Then again, I wouldn't even expect a Palestinian criminal justice system if there were ever to be such an actual thing. In theory, they have one, but in reality, it's a joke. But if they were actually to have a criminal justice system, like if they were ever to have an actual country, I wouldn't expect it to be perfect. Why would I? Of course, it wouldn't be perfect. But for some reason, Israel has to have the perfect system that can't in any way do anything wrong ever. It's, look, I'm not a fan. I have many complaints myself about the system in Israel, right? A lot. And I'll vent them. I do vent them sometimes, and I don't vent all of them, that's for sure. But even I recognize, look, at the end of the day, they have a system. Not always great. Certainly far from perfect. Has a lot of room for improvement. But at the end of the day, it is a system. And we have to acknowledge that. And we have to deal with that. And we have to hope that if there are changes needed, that the democratic powers that we have as citizens of a democratic country, or a relatively democratic country, we can go out in the streets, we can protest without having to have a psyop. We can actually go out in the street and protest and not fear for our lives that we're protesting. We can hold signs that criticize the government and not fear for our lives that we're doing so. Right? So that's what's happening in Gaza right now. You're seeing people who are, by the way, you'll notice many of those people, as I said in previous videos, they were at the parades when they let the hostages go in the recent months. They were at the parades when they let the coffins of the dead bodies, including the Bibas babies and Mrs. Bibas, their mother, right? They were at those disgusting parades, those evil parades. The same people at those disgusting parades are now protesting against Hamas. The same people that were chanting Hamas slogans and clapping for Hamas and clapping for their terrorists and all the disgusting things they did and saying, thank God for October 7th and all this disgusting stuff they're saying, literally celebrating a genocidal attack. The same bastards who, with their fat bellies and their fully charged iPhones and Android phones, are standing around cheering for the terrorists and jeering the Israelis who've been tortured and abused for more than 500 days in Hamas's terror tunnels and in the homes of average Palestinian Gazans, right, who've been holding the hostages for much of the 500 days, for the whole time, really, but they just change them from one location to another. So sometimes they're in tunnels, sometimes they're in apartments, sometimes they're in houses, sometimes they're in wherever. They're constantly moving them around. And many days of the 500 and plus days that they've been held hostage now, they've been held in the homes of regular Gazan citizens. And these same bastards who are now protesting against Hamas, many of them were holding hostages as early as now, right now. And they're out there protesting against Hamas, which is paying them to hold the hostages, by the way. They earn money from it, or special services or whatever. They get a benefit, right? They could be anything. They could be, bribery is very common in that society. They could be getting, you name it, whatever special favor you might think that a person could ask for in a corrupt society, they're getting it, right? You got to remember also, many of the people who kidnapped Israelis received benefits, like they were promised houses. Of course, now many of the houses don't exist anymore, but they were promised houses, and they will for sure get their houses when Gaza is rebuilt, if they're allowed to remain there. Right? They were promised houses by Hamas and the PIJ, etc. For every Israeli you kill, you get like an apartment. For every Israeli you bring back to Gaza, you get like 2 apartments or whatever, like $150,000 in cash. It's crazy things. Okay, it's ridiculous. And that's literally what is happening right now. Is you have people in Gaza who just days ago were standing around cheering on Hamas, saying, wow, what a great victory we have. By the way, how can you have a great victory when you're the victims of the genocide that they claim to be? What kind of, how are they starving with fat bellies? Please, somebody explain that to me. It doesn't make any sense. They're starving with, how can they have no electrical power, but they have fully charged iPhones? What are they're solar powered iPhones? No, it's because they have electricity, because they have fuel that they've been storing up for many years, because they haven't been dispensing it to their society as they should have. They kept it all for themselves, the Gazans, the Hamas. They didn't dispense it accordingly. And you can say, well, that was smart of them. No, it wasn't smart of them. It enabled them to do terror, which is illegal, which is a crime. It's a war crime and it's a regular crime. It's multiple crimes. Anyway, so that's what's happening. PSYOP in Gaza. Protests against Hamas are fake. And I've seen the evidence for it. I know that they're fake. I can tell you, I've seen that they're fake. And hopefully you'll see it soon too, but I can't show that to you. At least not yet. But whoever can surely will at some point if they can. But, there are security issues in question. So they will do their usual due diligence to make sure that happens. But I can tell you, without disclosing anything secret, it's 100% a PSYOP by Hamas to confuse the idiots on the left in the West. And in Israel too, by the way. It's organized to confuse the useful idiots around the world. 100%. So that's going to be it for now. Talk to you guys later. Peace. Shalom.